Why is a middle-aged male scientist interested in menopause? My wife, she went through a very bad menopause transition experience. I didn't know what was going on, and I couldn't help her lose weight. I've published more studies on weight loss in fit people than I think anybody else ever has, and I can't help my wife lose weight. This study made a huge impression on me. Most scientists don't believe that really exists, but it exists, and this study demonstrated that. When the only thing that researchers did was increase protein, no other intervention, women have gained lean mass and lost body fat.
Dr. Bill Campbell is the author of over 200 peer-reviewed studies and manuscripts on topics related to sports nutrition, physique enhancement, and exercise performance. His pioneering research includes dietary protein intakes to optimize body composition, rapid fat loss strategies, and weight loss resistance in women going through menopause transition. Let's start with the, I think it was University of Chicago study.
So that study was, in my opinion, the best sleep study I've ever read. A lot of sleep studies have people sleep deprived for 1 day, maybe 2 days. In this study, they lived in a facility for 42 days under different sleep deprivation conditions. So one time they were sleep deprived, one time they were not sleep deprived. And what they found, and in that study, from what I can remember, when they they had unfettered access to food. So, hey, eat as much as you want. And the nice thing, again, this is day after day. You can beat hunger for a day, you can beat hunger for a few days, but when you're hungry for multiple days, you don't beat that generally. So what they found in this study was when they were sleep deprived versus not sleep deprived, they gained a significant amount of body weight. And I know you know this. We know that visceral fat is associated with a lot of adverse health outcomes. And we know that sleep is also associated with a lot of adverse health outcomes. So this study was the first one to report that not only did sleep deprivation, not only was it responsible for them eating more food and gaining significantly more body fat, but significantly more visceral body fat. So this was the first study where they had under controlled conditions. So this was an intervention. This wasn't just an association study where they linked sleep deprivation to increase levels of visceral fat. And now we have this data. And again, this study was such high quality.
Just to even volunteer to stay in a metabolic ward, essentially, for like basically, let's just call it what it is. You're a prisoner, and you're going to be, locked in and getting all, but it's such great feedback that you can get under those controlled conditions, because obviously a lot of studies are just people are reporting back.
Yes.
So that was really fascinating. There was another study where, so this one is giving people ad libitum access to food, right?
Yes.
Seeing how much people eat based on whether or not they're sleep deprived. Another study put the test subjects, similar conditions, under a calorie restricted diet to see what happens when we're sleep deprived versus when we are getting adequate sleep. Let's talk about that.
Yeah. Now this study, because I'm a fat loss researcher, this study made a huge impression on me. There's far-reaching implications when I read this study about weight loss resistance, which most scientists don't believe that really exists, but it exists, and this study demonstrated that. So what they did in this study, similar, they had subjects have two different conditions, a sleep-deprived condition and a non-sleep deprived condition. And they put them on the same caloric deficit. I think they reduced their calories by 33%. And this was over several weeks. I don't remember how many weeks, but it was like 8 weeks, 10 weeks, something like that. And what they found was a couple things. When the subjects were sleep deprived, eating the same number of calories, they lost significantly less body fat, and they lost significantly more lean mass. So the way that I have interpreted that, if you're a fitness professional or nutrition professional and you're working with people on losing weight, and I know you've done this in your career, As much as the focus is on the nutrition, there needs to be an equal amount of focus on the sleep, because what this study taught me, you are literally spinning your wheels if you think you're dieting and trying to lose body fat. If you're not getting adequate sleep, don't diet. Don't waste all of that energy, those resources. And again, it's not just that they didn't lose as much fat. They lost significantly more lean mass. So one thing I always do when I look at studies, I always look at, out of the weight that was lost, how much came from fat tissue versus lean mass tissue. And the sleep deprived group, it was half of the weight lost came from lean mass stores. And that's the thing that has the long-term repercussions. That's why people gain weight back quickly when their diet is over. So that when I say that there's certain studies in my career, and I've been doing this for about 20 years, there's certain studies that have been profound in how I counsel people and how I, when I write research. This was one of those studies.
Yeah, it's just something that in our modern society we just don't think about. We don't think that sleep is impacting our metabolism. And again, just to reiterate this, the weight loss between the two groups was similar, but what they were losing. So the group that was getting adequate rest lost 55% more actual body fat, and they retained their lean muscle tissue during the weight loss. Versus the other group, they lost less body fat but lost more muscle, right? So that sleep deprivation is creating an alteration in how their body is using energy. And it starts to just basically burn off some of the most valuable tissue that we can possibly make. That it takes a lot of work to make muscle tissue.
Oh, yeah. And you made a really good point. If you stopped reading that study at just the weight loss, you would say, oh, okay, well, it really doesn't matter. And that's one thing I with my university students, I always say, if you're going to read any weight loss study, always pull back the curtain on body weight. What's the body fat and the lean tissue responses to this? Yeah. And to be honest, I was guilty for years myself. Like, I heard about your book and how important sleeping is. Like, yeah. And then I'm reading these studies. I'm like, man, I've not done a good job as an educator. But then again, when I read these studies, you know how it is. Like, you can hear things 100 times and until something clicks. Yeah. But now, literally, when I work with fitness professionals, I already said it once, but I'll reiterate. You have to prioritize their sleep as much as the weight loss diet. Otherwise, and again, I'm thinking of people going through like a divorce, loss of job. If we know there's times when people are going to have really high levels of stress that likely are going to impact their sleep quality, maybe this isn't the best time to try to lose weight, because you're not going to get the results.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And this is the cool thing of having you here. I'm so excited. I'm just holding back my excitement a little bit, is talking about weight loss, like in a real sustainable way, because a big part of this, and if we could, matter of fact, what we should do first and foremost is just set the template for your expertise, because people that I respect highly see you as like the guy when it comes to building muscle and understanding the metabolic impact of muscle. If you could, can you start with a little bit of your background and your expertise and how you got into studying muscle and all things related in the first place?
Yeah, so I got my PhD in exercise, nutrition, and preventive health. And my background was a bodybuilder. Like, I loved bodybuilding when I was younger. And I said, I want to have a bodybuilding lab. I want to help people build muscle, lose body fat. And I was told, there's no grant funding, and the government's not giving any money for bodybuilding. I'm like, well, I don't care. Like, I want to have a lab where I study muscle and fat. And I've been very, very blessed. Like, I'm living a dream life. I'm so blessed to be able to do what I've done. And I guess my career started, I also do a lot of performance-based things. So earlier in my career, it was a little more performance-based. And then I really got into what I like to say is I help people optimize their physiques within a maintainable lifestyle. And what that really means is I'm helping people lose excess body fat And I'd say what my lab is known for is fat loss research, but prioritizing the muscle tissue during a dieting phase, because there's a lot of bad ways to diet that it's sad, because people think what they're doing is working because they see the scale going down, but they don't have any understanding of what's going to happen 2 months from now, 3 months from now, when they're going to have more body fat on their bodies than what they had before they started, because they lost so much muscle tissue. So early in my career, did a lot of studies, was one of the first researchers to really just focus on females in fitness. So most of my research is on women. In women, losing excess body fat, or even just women in fitness trying to lose body fat. And then my career in the last year or two has shifted. I'm still protecting muscle, still trying to help people lose body fat, but my population has shifted to a middle-aged woman, particularly going through menopause. So that's where I'm at now.
That's phenomenal.
Sounds like an awesome job, right?
Yeah, man. It just, for me, of course, it just sounds so fun. And just, these are things that, again, so many of us simply don't know. And you're providing us. The cool thing about it, and even the studies that we covered earlier, a lot of this stuff is kind of difficult for the average person to kind of sift through and find the application for us in our lives. And you do this great research review for people, going through this data. And can you share where people can get access to that research review?
Yeah, thank you. It's Bill Campbell, PhD. And what I do there, as I think, is what you've been created to do as well. It's just taking research that's really hard to understand, and it takes a long time to read research. And what I do is I try to break it down so that really a lot of fitness professionals that subscribe, and as we were saying earlier, I love fitness professionals. They have a passion for what they do, and it's time consuming. And I know they try to stay on top of the research. So I don't want to do anything I can to just help them. Here's the latest study on this, or here's the best study on that. Let me do that heavy lifting for you. And it's very niched. The research review is, the studies that I review are always about losing body fat or building or maintaining muscle. So it's very specific. So if fitness professionals work with weight loss clients, of course, I think it's the best thing they should read.
Awesome. So in the URL is?
Bill Campbell, PhD.com.
Perfect. Got it. Now, you mentioned already what we're going to dive in on right now, which is you prioritize taking care of the muscle and fat loss.
Yes.
Right? And these two things, for the average person's mindset, especially if they're tuned into health and fitness, are kind of dichotomous.
Yeah.
Like you're doing one or the other. But you mentioned also, again, with muscle, what I want to do is I want to talk about what muscle really is and what it does for us. And I want to ask you the big question, which is, how do we get strong and maintain our muscle and lose fat?
Yep. Okay.
So let's start with muscle. What the hell is it?
So muscle is our ability to move. Without muscle, we do not move. It's what allows us to run from danger, and it allows us to protect our families. And again, I'm a fitness guy, so it allows me to run and jump and lift weights. So I love muscle.
What does it do for us?
Well, it's
biochemically.
Well, one thing in terms of our metabolisms, it has the largest role in our metabolic rates. Now, of course, our bodies have a lot of skeletal muscle, but your muscle really does. Your metabolic rate follows your muscle mass. So the more muscle you have, the higher your metabolic rate. Now, we used to think we would improve our metabolic rate a lot more than what we actually do. But in my research, whenever the subjects, if they ever lose muscle mass, we pick up on that. All I have to do is look at their metabolic rates, and I can say, yep, they lost muscle. And then I go look at the actual muscle data, and it's like, yeah, it's very, very predictive of one's metabolic rate.
Fascinating. Okay. So we got a little bit on what muscle is. So why do you prioritize protecting the muscle or getting your clients and patients stronger in conjunction with fat loss?
Okay, so I'm going to take that through two different lenses. I've learned that if a lot of people want to and need to lose excess body fat, and what I've learned is if you don't protect your lean mass during your dieting phase, and what I've learned is you will not be successful for long. You might lose body weight in the short term, but as soon as your diet is over, in many cases, you will gain the weight back. And sadly, people will, if they lost a lot of muscle in this process, they'll gain more body fat back than they initially had to start with. So we, in the scientific world, we call this body fat overshoot. So the enemy here is crash dieting. Crash dieting it looks great on the body weight scale, but what people don't appreciate is if you do crash dieting for extended periods of time, yes, you're losing a lot of body fat, but you're also losing a lot of lean mass. And we have several pieces of evidence. One of them dates back to the Minnesota starvation experiment. I don't know if you're familiar with that study, but essentially what they found was that, or there was a debate for many years. And the debate was once people lose body weight, their body now starts to work against this weight loss. And one of the things the body does is it elevates or increases its drive to eat. And the debate was our bodies are going to have an elevated hunger until one of two things happen. Either until we gain the body fat back that we lost, or until we gain back the muscle mass that we lost. And it seems that most of the research points to the fact that it's not really the body fat. So if we lose muscle mass, our levels of hunger are going to be elevated. And there's even a condition called hyperphagia, which is like an uncontrollable sense of hunger. And when your diet is over, you're going to have a strong drive to eat until you gain back the muscle that you lost. And that's where, again, this situation comes up where a lot of times, by the time you gain back your muscle, you've already gained a lot more body fat. So I've taken that research seriously, and I said, okay, if this is true, we need to design diets that protect muscle from the very start. So what my lab has done, and I think pretty successfully, we design diets that strip excess fat off the body. But right from the start, we're also having in the back of our minds, we're protecting every gram of muscle that we can. Because again, this is the long game.
So with this being said, and the body wanting to get back to that place that it was at, are you talking about something like a set point? Is this something that's real as far as our weight is concerned?
Yeah, I think it's very related to that concept. I don't have an opinion, or I don't have an informed opinion on the set point. I do know if you lose muscle, we have several lines of evidence that says you will gain that weight. You're much more likely to gain that weight back. And that does tie into that set point theory, which the way I understand it is your body has this given amount of body weight. And if you try to lose weight, it's going to fight you to get it back. And I guess in the sense of this research, I think that is true if you lose muscle. But if you maintain muscle, it seems that you're not going to struggle. Your body's not going to fight you as hard.
Okay, so how do we protect our muscle and, as you said, strip the fat away?
Yeah. So this you're asking me to talk about what I love talking about. This is great. So I always ask people, let's prioritize your goal. Like, do you want to lose fat or do you want to build muscle? So I always like to start with that. And we can do both, and we can talk about that later. But I look at dieting. So if we reduce people's calories, it's a very potent fat loss stimulus. And the way that I perceive a caloric deficit is that induces a catabolic stimulus on the body. And a catabolic meaning it breaks down tissue. That's good. That's good for fat tissue. Reduce my calories, my body's in a catabolic state. I want to break down body fat, good. But that catabolic state is ubiquitous, and that means there is also a stimulus to break down muscle, and we don't want that. So the way that I conceptualize this is during a diet, we have an overall catabolic environment. What can we do during this phase of fat loss to impose some anabolic stimuli. And the two most powerful anabolic stimuli in an overall catabolic environment are resistance exercise. So lifting weights is a anabolic stimulus to the body, and a relatively high protein diet. Protein is an anabolic nutrient. So it's actually simple. I mean, I've been studying this for 20 years, and really, when you go on a diet, two things that we want to do is resistance train and match that with an optimal amount of protein intake. Those two things keep giving, every time we lift weights and every time we're consuming protein, we're introducing these anabolic stimuli into this catabolic environment. And then there's other more advanced strategies that are a little bit newer, like diet breaks, refeeds, things like that actually take us out of this catabolic environment for a couple days or a week at a time. So those are some other strategies as well. So then the other reason why I'm really passionate about protecting muscle, and this goes with where my research is currently at, is helping women going through the menopause transition. One thing we've learned about this phase of life is not only do women start to have an accelerated rate of fat gain during the menopause transition, but for the first time in their lives, they're starting to lose lean mass. So, and this happens without, this is not a dieting thing anymore. This is just the physiology of menopause. So this is why it's the same principles. I just encourage women, obviously throughout their life, but particularly as they get into their 40s, as we're getting very close to this menopause transition, we want to resistance train to kind of give us as many defenses against this loss of muscle mass, and relatively high protein intakes to also help protect the muscle.
That's so important, man. Like, again, this is such a service to get this education out, because as you know, like thankfully there's a paradigm shift taking place with the conversation around menopause, but foundational things like making sure that you are really, really minding your protein intake during this transition to keep that anabolic stimulus that you've been talking about. And again, right now, and if you could, I want to talk a little bit more about this, because we talked about sleep earlier, and now bringing this conversation around menopause. For me, when I think about these things, I think about hormones, right? When I think about sleep, I think a huge hormonal cascade. And in my mind, I see these things as sort of like epicaloric controllers, right? So their calories are obviously an important factor, but something like menopause or sleep deprivation changes the way our bodies associate with the calories we consume, and also our energy expenditure as well. Like, things are changed.
Yep.
And so if we're moving, for example, we'll just stay on the same train, and we're going to come back and talk more about menopause. But if our goal is fat loss and of course retaining our muscle, and we're doing all this stuff to protect, and you said this earlier, to protect to get our results, and we're not minding our sleep quality, like, we're really kind of shooting ourselves in the foot. So with all this being said, when you said a high protein diet, for example, like, what do you mean by that? What should we be thinking about? It's like, can we figure that number out for ourselves right now? What we should be targeting?
Yeah. And first, for the midlife woman, what we know is that women in particular are eating very low protein intakes. The average protein intake of a menopausal woman is 70 grams per day. That is very low. So what I recommend, and I like to give recommendations based on one's goal body weight. So this is a way to do this so that anybody can say, okay, this is my weight now. I just need to do a quick multiplier to determine my optimal protein intake. And if somebody has obesity, that's why I like to say goal body weight. So the numbers that I recommend are 0.75 grams per pound of ideal body weight, up to 1 gram per pound of body weight. And then for our European listeners, that's 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilogram of body weight.
Just based on this alone, I would imagine like you just said, the average woman is way off in her protein intake. And so what is that going to do for her?
I love that you asked that. Listen to this. We have multiple studies where they've given women, again, this is in this menopausal space, when the only thing that researchers did was increase protein, no other intervention, women have gained muscle, lean mass, and lost body fat. They're increasing their calories by only adding protein alone. And it's acting as a fat loss stimulus. And of course, it's probably not too surprising, but there's no resistance training here. Now, of course, resistance training is awesome. I mean, we want people resistance training, but I read these studies and I'm like, this is fat. Like, protein is a powerful nutrient and it's anabolic, but it's actually catabolic to fat. Now, I also want to say I don't want people who are already eating a lot of protein to think, oh, I'll increase more. This seems to work when you are eating a low amount and then you take it to levels that are in the optimal range.
Awesome. Okay, so what you're saying, and this is going to be mind-blowing for a lot of people, I'm just going to reiterate, you're saying that by eating adequate amounts of protein, you're going to stimulate muscle growth.
Yes, without resistance. And I can send you the studies. Like
I believe you.
No, but I don't want your listeners to believe me. I can,
because that is like, you don't think of when you think about building muscle and growing muscle tissue, we think about resistance training.
Yeah, most of my life, I'm like, you can't build muscle by eating protein like that. I was taught that. I'm sure I've taught my students that, but you read a few studies where it happens, and I can't teach like that anymore.
That's fascinating. It's as if the proteins have an intelligence. It's as if the amino acids have an intelligence, and your body, its association with them is just like, I know what to do with this.
Yeah. Well, and our muscles are amino acids, so it makes sense, right? But yeah, what is shocking is there's no stimulus such as resistance training on the muscles, which is what I used to think you had to do. Now, again, if somebody's eating adequate protein, I don't want you to think, oh, I can double my protein and I'll build more muscle. I don't think that's going to happen. But if you're currently not eating an optimal amount and you increase it, that yes. And again, I'm aware of 4, possibly 5 different studies in humans where, and this is from sedentary people to resistance trained females. This study was in my own lab, where we increase calories only from protein and body fat has been lost.
That's powerful.
Yeah, it's protein is no joke.
Now, you know this as well as anybody. The past couple of decades, we've been hyper-focused as a culture on either fats or carbohydrates, right? It's been like either bashing or loving one of those, and protein's just been sitting on the sideline the whole time, like, hey, I'm kind of important here.
Yep.
So go ahead.
Well, you're asking all the things in my wheelhouse. It's almost like there's this big fight between the carb people and the fat people. Have you ever heard of the protein leverage hypothesis?
Oh, please share.
You're going to like this. So there's a theory, a hypothesis, and I think the researchers are Australian, and I think this was first observed in grasshoppers. And what this theory demonstrates, or what this theory supposes, is we have a natural protein threshold each day. And until you get enough protein and meet this daily threshold, you are going to have a drive to eat. And if you don't meet this threshold of protein over a 24-hour period, you're going to keep wanting more food. You're going to keep getting hungry. And in our culture in the United States, in this, let's just call it a ultra-processed food environment, because people are hungry, they're reaching for the foods that are the most convenient because that's quick food and I'm hungry. And so the foods that they're eating are, processed fats and high sugar, high salt foods. But that's when you're getting them, you're getting more and more calories, but those foods are also low in protein. So that's not getting you to your protein threshold. So you keep this hunger until you reach this threshold. And I'm going to discuss a study now that, again, best study I've ever read on this. And they basically set out to either validate the protein leverage hypothesis or to invalidate it. And the first thing they did was an entire other study where these researchers basically got a bunch of food scientists and they mastered the art of disguising the protein in different foods. Because one of the problems with protein food research is it's hard to hide protein. So people know, yeah, that was a lot of protein because it's usually not as good. And so they again, awesome study. They were able to disguise whether it was a low, moderate, or high amount of protein. Then in the second study, they brought subjects in and they gave them the exact same meals, same number of calories, but the only difference was, and this was for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, all disguised, but one had very low protein, one had a moderate amount, one had a higher amount of protein. That was the only difference. So they basically gave them, and they were living in the research lab again. So this is where, what I like to say, there's no Taco Bell temptation here. Researchers can monitor everything. And basically what we're asking is, if they were eating, so they gave them their trays of food. They could eat as much or as little of these trays of food as possible. If they wanted a second tray, here's a second tray. If they didn't want to eat it all, they took it away. And they had access to snacks. And basically what they were asking is, when the subjects are eating high protein, are they eating less overall calories? Or to stay it the other way, if they're eating low protein, are they going to eat significantly more calories? And one of these outcomes will either validate or invalidate the protein leverage hypothesis. And what they found was the subjects not knowing high versus low protein intake. When they were given low protein intake, they ate significantly more calories, mostly from snacks and I think the dinner meal, which again, I don't like to say proves as a scientist, but that study really added a lot of credibility to the protein leverage hypothesis in humans. And just for a side note, the moderate and high protein feedings foods, there was not a difference between them. And that actually makes sense because once you meet the threshold, there's not a greater advantage. So, and if you think about this just ties into everything we know about a high processed food diet, which is low protein. So a lot of this stuff makes sense when you can start putting the pieces together of that general nutrition and like an obesogenic environment.
Yeah. No, what is it about protein that does this for us, that really supports our metabolic health?
Yeah, so one of the things is it's the most satiating nutrient, so it makes us feel the fullest. The other thing is metabolic. So a term to describe this is called the thermic effect of food. Some people will refer to that as dietary induced thermogenesis. So what that means is when you eat protein compared to fats or carbs, it doesn't take your body much energy to digest and absorb fats and carbs. But protein is the only macronutrient that has nitrogen bonds in it, so nitrogen atoms. And that's hard to break. Like that's not easy. So the body has to really work hard to break apart these amino groups or these nitrogen bonds. And not only that, but once you break it apart, your body has to digest, absorb, and transport the amino acids to the body. And then we look at, well, when amino acids go to the muscles, they will generally increase muscle protein synthesis. Carbs don't do that. Fats don't do that. And that's also an energy demanding process. So think about it like this. If we have 100 calories of carbs, protein, and fat, I always, when I teach this to my students, I say 100 calories of butter, fat, 100 calories of Skittles, carbs, and 100 calories of chicken breast. Out of those 100 calories, 25 of them are being used up in the protein just to do the work of digesting it. Only 7 calories are being used to digest and absorb the Skittles, the carbs, and 2% are being used to digest and absorb the fat. So this is another reason why I tell people, if you're going to overeat on protein because there's going to be less body composition damage.
It's like a net gain.
Well, I wouldn't. You're still getting 75 calories
Right.
From the protein. So I wouldn't say that it's, some people would say it's a free food. I don't think it's a free food, but I'll say this. I've never seen a study where people that have overeaten on protein where they've gained body fat.
Fascinating. So again, 100 calories, if we're doing that with a protein dominant food like the chicken breast, we're going to be, quote, absorbing like 75.
Yeah, you're only
calories.
getting 75
so it's
of
a net
those.
Gain of 75.
Yes. But instead of 98
right, which
or
comes
93
with
from the
butter.
carbs and yes, yep.
And also another thing is like, what are those things, the carbs or Skittles, for example, what's the influence it's having on insulin?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And let me just say, this is just an example. Don't test this, but yeah, insulin's going to go high. It's not going to do anything for very little for your hunger. I got another study that actually, my wife is not into this at all, but she was like, is that true? I'm like, I'll show you the study. They gave subjects 2 meals of the same calories. It was a cheese sandwich. One of them was a processed cheese sandwich. So white bread and processed cheese, I think like Velveeta, maybe American, some kind of processed cheese. The other food meal was whole grain bread and cheddar cheese. Same calories. And also the same subjects. One time they got the processed sandwich, the other time they got the whole food sandwich. And what they did was they had them eat both sandwiches, same number of calories, and then they measured their metabolic rate for the next 6 hours. And your body does increase the amount of calories you're burning after we eat food, because again, it takes energy to digest and absorb these foods. What they found was after eating the processed food sandwich, the subjects burned approximately 75 calories over 6 hours. The whole food sandwich, they burned double, 140 calories. 150 would be double. I'm just going to say double to make it easy. That's calories that nobody thinks. We always think calories in, calories in. Well, this is calories out, and that's one meal. If you eat 3 meals per day, every day, and you're eating ultra-processed foods versus whole foods, this adds up.
Yeah.
So this is something else. I didn't used to really take sleep as seriously as I should. And I used to be fairly lenient to say, yeah, go ahead. If you want some processed foods, it's not gonna. But the more I'm learning, the more I'm hearing myself say, hey, let's really try to reduce our processed foods as much as possible. And let me just say, I like processed foods. So this is a battle for myself. Like I'm not I struggle with that.
So this would be more the paradigm of if it fits your macros, it's all good.
Yes.
But what was really interesting about that study was that the macronutrients were all the same as well.
Yes. Minor differences. The whole food did have 10 more grams of protein. And of course, and this is what I talk through with my students.
On accident. It's kind of, what I mean is like, it's accidental because it's supposed to be the same sandwich, just one is processed, one's not. The real one accidentally has 10 more grams. What do you know? What
they did everything they
real
could.
cheese versus the crap.
Yep. So we would expect a higher protein meal to increase calories more. So there's a limitation. But let me say 2 things about that. The other sandwich had 20 grams more carbs than the other one. I think fat was almost identical. So that offset this a little bit. But what this study did was it actually made the processed food sandwich actually closer to the whole food, because which processed foods do we eat that are high in protein? The reality is, in our world, it's actually going to be worse because people aren't choosing Cheetos that have high protein or Takis or you get my point. In the real world, ultra processed foods don't have much protein at all. So it would have been nice if it was exactly the same amount of protein, but it was a little different. But yeah. I again, that's to me, and again, I analyze studies. That's how I do. To me, that was a marginal inconvenience.
Yeah. Well, that man is so powerful because again, on the surface, you would think they're the same. That's my
same calories.
You'd think that they're the same. because it's the same stuff. This is cheese and this is cheese. This is bread and this is bread.
Yep.
But the very nature of them being, one is ultra processed and one is more of a quote whole food version of that thing, it changes what it's made of. And that's really, at its core, the big difference and how your body's associating with it. So that real food is going to naturally come along with the satiating benefits of the protein.
Yeah, and how many more micronutrients and phytonutrients are we getting? And just a thought that comes to my mind, and I don't have knowledge on this, but I hear this all the time. In fact, just heard it yesterday. People travel out of the United States to go to Europe or somewhere else. They eat similar types of foods, breads, cheeses, whatever, and they lose weight when they come back. Now, I always, I appreciate you might be doing more walking or something, but it could be more to that. Again, this is not an area that I've studied, but I hear it a lot.
Yeah, there's something to it, obviously,
Yeah.
So now I got to ask you this, because there are a lot of people who feel that eating too much protein or even, moderate to high amounts of proteins is bad for you. All right. Have you experienced pushback on that? Like, is eating too much protein bad for you? Isn't it going to kill you?
So I don't think so. And what I want to do when I hear that, I don't take that lightly, because I'm a scientist and I write papers on high protein. I encourage my children, my daughters to eat higher protein because they're active. And the last thing I want to do with my position as a nutrition researcher is to tell people to do something that's harmful. Like that would be horrible. So one thing I've done to kind of check that in real time, specifically on this issue, and I've done this for years, I tell my students, so I've taught sports nutrition. I teach a class called The Science of Weight Management. So what I do on the first day of class, and this is no joke, I say, I'm going to tell you this semester, I'm going to provide you evidence about high protein diets. If you can give me one study that has to be done in, healthy people, like I don't want somebody like on end stage renal disease. So in healthy people where they were given higher protein intakes and there was a negative health outcome, you give me that research paper and you get an A, and you don't ever have to come back, because they've given me a lesson that I will never forget. I've done that for at least 10 years and I haven't had one, and I've taught, hundreds, if not thousands of students in that time. Plus I'm looking for research. Now there are studies that are associations, like, hey, these women had, or these men had higher protein intake and they also had higher whatever negative health outcome. But that's not an intervention study. Right. So I do make it, I want a study where they gave one group higher protein, one group lower protein, because that's the highest quality of evidence. So, and that study has not been produced yet, or my students haven't gotten an A from that yet.
Awesome. I want to circle back to talk about your research regarding health overall, and in particular, being able to manage weight, body fat, muscle in relationship to menopause. Mm-hmm. So what do women need to know? Because also, again, for the people that love women, I love my wife very much, but what are some of the things that women need to know? Because this conversation, thankfully, it's emerging and women are getting a lot more support. But your research in particular is shining a bright light that this process, the way that our culture has, framed this to look, there's so many resources and things that we can do to support this process. So let's talk a little bit more about this.
Okay. And thank you for letting me talk about this. One, I will say I released a YouTube series on menopause, fitness, and nutrition. It's 15 episodes. So it's Bill Campbell, PhD. It's my YouTube handle. So if people want to watch this, and I want to start with saying, why is a middle-aged male scientist interested in menopause? Like, that's not common. And the reason for that is I was very ignorant of menopause. And my wife, and my wife has allowed me to talk about this publicly, she went through a very bad menopause transition experience. I mean, it was not good. She didn't know what was going on. I didn't know what was going on. One thing that was going on, and this was not the most serious of her being in a bad place, but she gained a lot of weight for her. She's been very fit her whole life. So she's gaining maybe 15 pounds of body weight. And I would say, well, luckily you're married to a fat loss researcher, and she's dieted in the past, and I've always helped her with that. So I'm like, well, this will be easy. And I couldn't help her lose weight. And again, there were other things going on, anxiety, couldn't like talk about sleep deprivation. I mean, and just not good. But it was like, look, I've published, more studies on weight loss in fit people than I think anybody else ever has. And I can't help my wife lose weight. This is troubling to me. And then the more that we started to learn, the more I realized, okay, I have to study this. So it's where the rest of my career will be. Like, I am passionate about this. So I'm still a fat loss and exercise person, protecting muscle. I just changed the population. So that's the reason why what has shifted in this for me. You asked, well, what do women need to know? And I think the first thing is, and I think you may have mentioned this earlier, the first thing is to know, just have an understanding of what's happening to your body. My wife didn't know. I didn't know. And essentially what's happening is their hormones are changing. Specifically, let's list the three big players. Estrogen or estradiol levels are going down. Progesterone levels are going down. And then another hormone called follicle stimulating hormone is rising. So I'm going to talk about these in the context of my expertise, which is body composition. So as these start to go down, and this starts about 7 years before menopause, where these hormones start to decline. And as this is happening, and as we get closer to menopause, there's like about a 4-year period that I call the body composition menopause transition. And that's where I mentioned earlier, two things are happening. Women are gaining body weight, body fat, a little bit each year in their 30s and 40s. But now there's an inflection point, an accelerated rate of body fat gain. And at the same time, muscle mass is going up a little, and then that starts to go down. So there's the body composition repercussions from this, plus all of the known vasomotor symptoms like hot flashes, night sweats, greater anxiety. Some women will have joint pain, no motivation, low libido. So there's a bunch of other side effects of this. So I always want to say, hey, please get blood work. Just know what your hormone levels are so that you can kind of know when this is starting to happen. I encourage people to get a DEXA scan because bone mineral density loss starts to accelerate during this time as well. So DEXA is great because for me, I get body fat, I get muscle, and we get bone mineral density. So I think just to answer the question globally, be aware of what's going on in your body because we weren't aware. And my daughters will be aware.
All right, it's powerful. So what are a couple of the things that people are going to learn in the YouTube series and just some advice for women that they can take away today, whether it's perimenopause or menopause or just any phase of the life cycle to support this process? Because what I'm hearing is that sharp inflection point, the sharpness of it doesn't have to be so excessive. There are some things that can be done to kind of mitigate to support this transition. In particular, again, you being an expert in fat loss. So this is something that's on a lot of women's minds in general. Mm-hmm. But what about during this particular phase? Yeah. What do they need to know?
And one thing, not every woman is going to have the experience that my wife had. So some women are going to go through this phase and they're not going to have nearly the negative consequences. So I do not want to give the impression, oh, it's horrible for everybody. But I do want to acknowledge the women who are struggling because, and again, I know it's getting better. Again, somebody like me studying menopause fitness, that's awesome. Like that's proof that things are changing. but not every woman is going to have the same experience. One of the things so the series in general is we're going to talk about the first thing I would like everybody to do is to embrace a fitness lifestyle. That is your best defense against anything that's going to be adverse to their health. So if we can have them resistance training, that's gonna help prevent the loss of muscle. Maybe they still lose muscle, but they don't lose as much. Training using cardio to improve their aerobic fitness, their aerobic capacity, or VO2 max. If you can improve your VO2 max, the way that I think about that is that means you're going to have healthier lungs, you're going to have a healthier heart, you're going to have healthier blood vessels, you're going to have healthier muscles that need to take in this oxygen that we're able to pump because we have a healthy heart more. So embracing a fitness lifestyle is the first thing. On the nutrition side, and I have a lot of questions on this, but the nutrition side is optimize protein. That's low-hanging fruit. And along with that, let's try to be aware of lowering processed foods. And one of the first studies I'm doing in my lab is we're going to study a anti-inflammatory Mediterranean style diet. Anecdotally, I'm getting very good feedback on this diet helping women be able to lose weight. And I'm going to come back to that in a moment. And then the other large area, and this is towards the end of our YouTube series, is be open-minded to the idea of hormone replacement therapy. So some women have contraindications and they shouldn't take hormone replacement therapy. And I'll also say now, this decision is between the patient and her evidence-based physician. So I'm not telling women to take hormone replacement therapy, but I am asking them to be open-minded to it. My wife, that changed her trajectory immediately. And again, my biggest regret was that we didn't start earlier. So have those conversations, be open-minded about hormone replacement therapy. And then just back to a phenomenon that I can't point to research and say this is happening, but it's something I believe, and I would not have said this a few years ago. The concept is weight loss resistance. So this is, I'm an evidence-based fitness professional. So it's the fact that I'm saying this, but I believe there is a subset of women going through this phase of life that despite being in a caloric deficit cannot lose body fat. I saw it in my wife, but that's an N of one, that's anecdotal. Yeah. But since I've been in this universe, I've had thousands, literally thousands of women reach out to me and tell me this is their experience. I'm a fitness professional. I've tracked every gram of food that's gone into my mouth for 15 years, and something's happening to my body, and I cannot lose weight. I always like I frame this as I can either tell you, well, diet harder, or stop being lazy, which is a message a lot of them are getting, or I can believe them and just be open to the idea that maybe something's happening here, and I'm choosing to say, hey, maybe this is happening, and let me use my lab and resources to try to figure out what's happening.
Yeah. Wow.
Did you come across this?
Of course. Okay. Literally, I start thinking about people who are coming in that I was working with, and they might be having 1,000 calories a day or 900 calories a day, and the scale's not moving. And nobody believes them, right? Including me. Like, you know, and it's just like this, for situations like this, it's important because the same thing, I'm very analytical. I want to see the evidence, is for us to sometimes take a step back and think about the intelligence of the human body and what it does to protect itself and what it does to adjust to circumstances and conditions, and, and being able to, literally slow our expenditure of energy, and where that expenditure is coming from. That's something we have a lot of data on. Is what, whether it's burning fat or burning muscle based on inputs. But just understanding that there is something, and I call it, again, an epicaloric controller.
I like that.
Right? That is determining what our body is doing with the calories we're associating with. And so being more mindful of this, and as you mentioned, like more is on the way for sure. And you also mentioned you are working on a study with the modified Mediterranean diet. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, so we're going to start. Well, first, currently we're doing the first ever menopause fitness survey. This is crazy. We have thousands of studies on menopause. We have some studies in women that embrace a fitness lifestyle. I could not find, and my team we couldn't find any survey studies that merged, hey, these women embrace a fitness lifestyle, they lift weights, and they're going through or will be going through or have gone through menopause. So Dr. Gabrielle Lyon she's one of my colleagues on this study. I've got an all-star team. So what we're doing in this initial survey is just getting stories like, what's your fitness routine? What's your nutrition? What's your experience through menopause? Are you open to the idea of hormone replacement therapy? So that's really going to accelerate my learning curve in this space. And then this diet that we're looking at, we're going to take a case series approach, which means it's only going to be 10, 15 women initially. And we want to validate that they truly are experiencing weight loss resistance. And if they are, we're gonna ask them to do I guess as a scientist, we're not asking. We're gonna prescribe a anti-inflammatory Mediterranean style diet, which is basically whole foods based, elimination of processed foods. Do this for approximately 4 weeks and then monitor their health outcomes. So we'll get blood work, of course, body composition stuff. And I do want to go back to the weight loss resistance concept for a moment. I guess I want to cut slack to the fitness professionals who don't believe this, because I had this mentality for years. When somebody says they can't lose weight, then usually the reason is because they're eating more calories than what they say they are. And we call that underreporting. And that is everywhere in the scientific literature. So we know that people underreport what they eat. So if somebody came to me who's 28 years old, they're relatively new to fitness and they don't know a lot about nutrition, and they told me, hey, I can't lose weight. I'm eating very low calories. I would say, I might not say it, but I would say, well, let's make sure that you're actually eating what you say you are. And then we have methods to do that. A 47-year-old woman in midlife going through menopause tells me the same thing, especially when they say, hey, I've been tracking everything, or I'm a fitness professional. Mm-hmm. I don't dismiss that. I now believe that. And I can't wait to do research to see what I can find.
Yeah. A great example, we had Autumn Calabrese in here recently. And, for her, a 5-pound weight gain is unheard of. Again, she's been in this field. She's somebody who's always tracking, very adamant. Dare I say, she's a little neurotic about her stuff and tracking. And so that 5-pound weight gain just had her, already she was struggling with, parts of, her emotion and emotion stability. But when that hit, she was just like, I don't know what's going on.
And can I guess she changed nothing about what she was doing?
That's it. Yeah.
She hasn't changed her food, hasn't changed her routine. Yeah, that's the very common story. And I will say, it's very debilitating to hear people tell her, oh, you're lazy.
Mm-hmm. And also, what are you upset about? It's 5 pounds.
Yes.
I saw somebody even said that, why is she upset?
Yeah. And that's why women that embrace a fitness lifestyle, that's a lot of weight for them, 5-10 pounds. And there's something else I've appreciated. If we go through history, think of your mom, my mom, we've never had a time where we've had women in a fitness lifestyle, right? I mean, it's only been the last 20 years or so. I remember when I was an undergrad, I remember to this day the number of females in the weight room. There were 2, and I remembered their names. That's totally changed. So now for the first time, we're getting this large influx of women who've been embracing a fitness lifestyle, lifting weights, tracking macros, but we don't have any research on this population because we haven't had it before. So there's a lot we don't know.
Yeah. One of the big takeaways from this conversation is we have an even greater emphasis on building muscle. And building it is in particular, if you can get ahead of the curve and build muscle prior to menopause, but also in this phase, focusing on building and maintaining your muscle mass, and of course, later in life. And the big question now, though, is, and I got you here, how do we do it? What's the best way to go about building muscle?
Well, that's the easiest question I'm asked, and that is easy. It's resistance training, lifting weights.
How? What is the best practice? Can I lift weights once a week and I'm going to be good to go?
Yeah, so generally we want to lift weights. Well, let me say the most important thing is the intensity of our lifting. So we want to lift a weight to near failure. So that means if I pick up a dumbbell and I'm going to lift, and I can lift it 14 times and I can't lift it 15, I want to lift that weight about 13 or 14. I want to take it to where I really can't lift it for more than a rep or two. So that we call that intensity. So you want to lift until the point that we call near failure. And we also want to lift with what I say is relatively heavy weights. Now that doesn't mean that you have to lift to something just one time, but it does mean, and in my YouTube series, I kind of shame pink dumbbells, and I don't apologize for that. And this isn't my opinion. There's research that has reported that females, rather than males, choose weights that are too light for their capabilities. Men are actually, I'd say, idiots, because they choose weights that get them injured and have to go to the hospital, especially when they've taken a lot of time off. They go back to what they were lifting when they were 20. But the message I want to send is lift weights that are relatively heavy. And that can be, and I say generally between 6 and 12 repetitions. In terms of days per week, if you've never trained before, 1 time a week is awesome until you get comfortable or used to this.
Per body part.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. If you want to get that specific. Yeah. So what we know about body parts, this is how I program. 1 day per week we know is not optimal for training a body part. So let's just say I want to work on my shoulders. If I'm going to do 10 sets for my shoulders per week, I don't want to do all 10 sets on Monday. It's better to do it 2, 3, 4 after you get past 1 day per week. The research suggests that 2's no better than 4 or worse than 4, 3 versus 6. We just know we don't want to do all of the lifting for a body part on 1 day. We have enough, not a lot, but enough to suggest let's spread that out. And it makes sense, right? If you're only getting 1 day per week, that's an anabolic stimulus only on 1 day. Then you go 6 days without any anabolic stimuli. But if you do it twice a week or 4 times per week, well, that's more anabolic stimuli. Now, if you take that too far, you would think, well, 6 days would be better. Well, the research doesn't advocate for that either.
It's fascinating. So you mentioned if people are beginning, one session per body part a week is...
Yes, I would call that maybe like a foundation stage. Just learn the movements. And let me also say, if you're new to this, try to find a fitness professional like this. The fitness professional, they are the best people. They have a service mindset, and they'll help you make sure you're doing the lifts correctly with good form. But yeah, beginners, just get in the weight room 1 day per week for maybe a month or 2, and then let's see if we can get you to 2 or 3 days per week, 4 days. Like my current routine right now is 3 days per week when I'm on my game.
Yeah, and I'm a big. This is the first time I'm saying this, but, I tend to be very much, again, just experimenting, researching, figuring things out myself. But one of the greatest gifts that I had, it wasn't going and reading up on a certain machine or a lift, but it was having somebody to teach me. And that person, he was Mr. Caveman, Missouri, like some natural bodybuilding guy, who I worked with. And, he's crazy fit, And, but we started training together. This is 2000. All right. The year 2000, he had me doing creatine and doing supersets and all this stuff. This is 25 years ago. Holy shit.
Yeah, and creatine was not that. That was only introduced to the market like 3 years prior. So he was on his game.
Yep. So, just being able to learn, like, and again, just my type of thinking, I want to know why, right? And so him having those inputs and training volume and all this stuff, but those foundations, again, if you just work with a trainer or somebody, again, who's acclimated to educating you, just even getting a few sessions in to give you a foundation, you can of course build on that over time. But I reiterate that advice to, like, if you're getting started, get a trainer, get a coach to get you going.
Yeah.
Now let's take it to the person who is, quote, trained, who's been lifting weights for a couple of years, and they're wanting to really, like, they know that I have more potential. I have more potential with building muscle, to getting stronger. And they've been doing, a traditional leg day, just going to destroy the legs on, one day a week, a chest day, back day. You've already reiterated the data is indicating, and again, like we were talking about Jay Ferrugia a little bit earlier, and he's been talking about this for quite some time, for years, about training value, splitting it up and having more touch points through the week. And so I want to know where we're at as far as the volume. All right. So you mentioned, all right, we'll take a major muscle group. Let's take back. Let's take back. What is the ideal or optimal amount of sets per week? Again, we're looking at 6 to, we'll say 12 reps, like weight that we can get near failure.
Yep.
What is the number of sets that we ideally are targeting each week?
So let me give a little context to the general idea or categories of sets per week. So 1 to 10 sets per week is generally considered low volume. 11 to 20 sets is considered moderate volume. And then 20 sets or more is considered high volume. So when we look at bodybuilders who step on stage, who are lean, and every thought of every day revolves around building as much muscle as possible, they're typically doing a little over 20 sets per body part on average. So there's the one end of the extreme. When I ask or when I get this question, my analysis of the research says the best place to make that decision on the optimal number of sets per week is to make it individual to what the person has been currently doing. So I'll give an example. What are you currently doing? So if you're currently doing, let's say, 8 sets per week, the research suggests don't increase that by more than 20% at a time. So if you I'm going to go from 8 to 16, that is likely you're going to have more of a lower stimulus to fatigue ratio, which is not optimal. And that's not to say that 16 sets is bad. It just means you're currently doing 8. Let's go to 10. Let the body adapt to 10. Let's go to 12. Let's go to 14. And then you're at 16. Does that make sense? So yeah. A 20%, if you're thinking, I want to increase my volume, 20% more than you're currently doing on a body part or a muscle group per week basis it seems to be the best approach. So I don't like saying, do this. What are you currently doing? And let's build slowly over that. And the other thing is, if I did have somebody just go to 18 sets, well, what are they going to be doing in 3 years? Like, do you want to be at 42 sets? Like, that becomes not very functional if you have a family. So the answer in short is go up slowly relative to your current volume.
Okay. And so ideally, we're going to split it up into at least 2 days. Mm-hmm. We'll just say, I'm at 15 sets, for my back that I'm training each week. That's the volume that's really, getting me the results that I want. Ideally, I'm going to split that up in at least 2 days.
Yes.
But possibly 3. But when do we get to, like, not diminishing returns, but we don't see that much difference?
I've looked at this quite extensively, and we know that 1 day per week is not ideal. You still build muscle on 1 day per week, but you leave some muscle gains on the table. So 2 to 6, 3 versus 4, 5 versus 2. As long as the volume is the same, like I'm not saying, if volume is equal, we're asking now this is now a frequency question. How frequently should we stimulate each muscle group? And I can't, based on the evidence, I can't say 4 is better than 3. So 1's not ideal, anywhere from 2 to 6. And one of my favorite routines was I was doing 6 days per week. So very low volume each time, but every day I was doing, something for my chest. Those were whole body routines.
Got it.
So I was hitting, each body part 6 days per week. And I like that for that time.
Now I'm really hearing why, the big why behind it. That's the benefit of having you here, because it's just like, if I can get all 15 sets in one workout and then just do it again next week. And of course, I'm usually hammered and sore until,
Yes. Yeah.
But why wouldn't I just do it and get that stimulus and then heal, recover? And it's because of the stimulus, the anabolic stimulus, more frequently is what we're getting.
That's what I think. That is my, and not just mine, but that's a lot of the scientists that study resistance training. That is what I would say. That's a consensus. But then why isn't 4 better than 2? So there's a limit to this. Yeah. And I'll phrase it like this too. Why not 15 sets in one day? Well, the goal here is to induce an anabolic stimulus on that muscle. It may be that after 5 sets or 8 sets, you're really not getting any more of an anabolic stimulus for set 9, 10, 11, 12. So why do that? And again, some people would call that junk volume. It's better to have higher quality sets that are lower each time. So again, we don't know this, but let's say the optimal amount of the anabolic stimulus is after 4 sets per body part. Well, there's your limit. So there's an argument against 15 sets in one day. You're not getting added anabolic stimulus after a certain number of sets.
Awesome. All right. Now I'm going to ask you what's the meaning of life question? All right.
Okay.
In fitness.
Okay. That makes it easier.
Can I build muscle and burn fat at the same time? Can I, sitting here in front of you, can this guy build muscle and burn fat at the same time?
Absolutely. Caveat though, it is not the expectation and it's not common, but plenty of research that we have bodybuilders who've been training for years can build muscle and lose body fat. So can it happen? Yes. Would I leverage my business claims on that promise? Absolutely not. Clearly, it's more likely to happen in a beginner, somebody who's never lifted weights. Not as common in somebody who's been lifting for many years, but it can happen, and it can happen in resistance trained people. Not as common, but it can happen.
Okay, awesome. I would just imagine just this general idea was that you'd have to be a lot more penny pinching and minding.
Oh yeah, yes, yeah. You've got to pretty much have everything dialed in. You got to have your recovery dialed in, your protein intake dialed in, your volume, your frequency,
your sleep.
Yeah, absolutely, sleep. Yes. Yeah.
So
that's when we adapt.
Yeah. So with this being said, you would advocate for us to focus on one thing. Like, for example, if, I know the value, like, especially, if somebody is in their, 40s, we'll just say a guy in their 40s or a woman in their 40s. And this is like a prime time to leverage the anabolic capacity we have, put on as much muscle as we can for later in life. So I want to prioritize building muscle, but I want to burn fat too. You'd say focus on building muscle right now, which would generally, you need to focus more on calorie surplus, focus on building muscle, and we can worry about the fat loss later.
Yeah. So the way that I answer that, that's why I think when we started, what is your primary goal? If your goal is to build muscle, then dieting is not your friend. Everything about a caloric deficit works against your muscle building goal. So let's call that for what it is. If you're telling me you want to build muscle, then don't diet. And this is more of a conversation in the females that I've worked with in the past. They tend to be more prone to, well, can I diet? Not you. If you're telling me your goal is muscle, now within that goal, let's design a program, exercise and nutrition program, where we gain as little body fat as possible. Likewise, if somebody says, my primary goal is to lose fat, okay, we will design a program that will prioritize fat. But I mean, obviously, you know my philosophy here. We're also going to design a program where we maintain as much muscle as we can. But the bigger sin here is people who tell me they want to gain muscle and then they're dieting for 5 weeks in a row. I'm like, your actions are not supporting what you tell me your goals are. And it's fine to tell me, it's fine to acknowledge, I want to build muscle and lose fat. And I'd say, great, if that's what you want, just know that that's not going to happen as quickly as losing fat, because that happens relatively fast compared to building muscle. But we can design a program that I think would facilitate that goal the best.
Amazing. I could listen to you all day, talk about this stuff. So where can people get more access to your work? Can you mention the study review again, and also the YouTube?
Yep. The YouTube series is on menopause, fitness, and nutrition and hormone replacement therapy. That is Bill Campbell, PhD. And my research review is billcampbellphd.com. And then lastly, Instagram, pretty active on Instagram. That's Bill Campbell, PhD.
Amazing. This has been awesome. Thank you so much for sharing your genius with everybody. And, we've had this kind of parallel. Sometimes, again, you meet people that's just like, how did we wait so long to get connected? So I'm very grateful that you guys, came to hang out with us today. I really do appreciate it.
Yeah, I was so excited to be on the show. So thank you for inviting me.
Hey, if you like this video, make sure to check out this video right here.
Some of the foods that help you naturally produce GLP-1 include things that have a lot of protein in it. So we're talking about eggs, we're talking about lean meats, even dairy, if you can tolerate dairy. These are foods that help with producing GLP-1s.